The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert as Thomas Crawford rode his horse through the rocky canyon. He was a young surveyor from back east, hired by the railroad company to map the territory for new train tracks. His brown hair was dusty from days of travel, and his blue eyes scanned the landscape with both wonder and caution. Thomas had heard the stories about Apache warriors in these lands. The older men at the fort had warned him about traveling alone, but he needed to finish his work quickly. The railroad bosses were impatient, and Thomas needed the money to send back to his sick mother in Pennsylvania. As his horse picked its way carefully down a narrow trail, Thomas noticed smoke rising from behind a cluster of red rocks. He pulled his horse to a stop and listened carefully. The sound of voices drifted on the wind, speaking in a language he didn't understand. His heart began to beat faster. Thomas knew he should turn around and ride back to the fort, but curiosity got the better of him. He dismounted and tied his horse to a small tree, then crept forward on foot. He climbed up behind some large boulders and peered down into a hidden valley. Below him was an Apache camp with several teepees arranged in a circle. Women tended cooking fires while children played nearby. Men sat in groups, their faces painted with red and yellow designs. Thomas had never seen Native Americans up close before, and he was amazed by how different their life seemed from his own. As he watched, a young Apache woman caught his attention. She was beautiful, with long black hair that shined in the sunlight and dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She wore a dress made of soft deerskin decorated with colorful beads. Thomas found himself unable to look away as she moved gracefully between the teepees, carrying a water basket. Suddenly, the woman looked up toward the rocks where Thomas was hiding. Their eyes met for just a moment before Thomas quickly ducked down. His heart pounded as he wondered if she had really seen him, or if it was just his imagination. For the next several minutes, Thomas remained hidden behind the boulder, not daring to move. When he finally peered out again, the woman was gone. The camp continued its daily activities as if nothing had happened. Thomas carefully made his way back to his horse, his mind racing with thoughts of the beautiful Apache woman. He knew he should forget what he had seen and continue with his surveying work, but something about her eyes haunted him. Over the next few days, Thomas found excuses to return to the area near the Apache camp. He told himself he was just doing his job, mapping the land, but in truth he was hoping to catch another glimpse of the mysterious woman. On his third visit to the canyon, Thomas was measuring distances with his surveying equipment when he heard a twig snap behind him. He spun around to find the Apache woman standing just 20 feet away, watching him with curious eyes. Thomas froze, not knowing whether to run or speak. The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was some strange creature she had never seen before. She said something in Apache, her voice soft but firm. "I don't understand," Thomas said quietly, spreading his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm sorry if I'm trespassing on your land." The woman stepped closer and Thomas noticed she carried no weapon. She pointed to his surveying equipment and said something else in her native language. Then to his surprise, she spoke a few words in broken English. "What you do?" she asked, gesturing toward his instruments. Thomas was amazed that she knew any English at all. "I'm measuring the land," he explained slowly. "For the railroad company." The woman's expression grew serious when she heard the word railroad. She had heard stories from other tribes about the iron horse that brought white settlers and trouble. "Railroad bad," she said firmly, shaking her head. Thomas wanted to explain that he was just doing his job, that he wasn't one of the bad white men who caused trouble for Indian people. But he realized how difficult it would be to make her understand. "My name is Thomas," he said, pointing to himself. The woman hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Ayana." They stood there in awkward silence, two people from completely different worlds trying to communicate. Thomas felt drawn to this woman in a way he had never experienced before. There was something about her strength and grace that made him want to know more about her. Ayana seemed equally curious about Thomas. She had seen white men before, but always from a distance. They were usually soldiers or settlers who meant trouble for her people. But this man seemed different somehow, gentler and less threatening. As the days passed, Thomas and Ayana began meeting secretly in the canyon. She taught him words in Apache, and he helped her practice her English. Thomas learned that Ayana had learned some English from a missionary who had lived with their tribe for a short time years before. Their meetings were brief and careful. Both knew that if Ayana's people discovered she was talking to a white man, there would be serious consequences. The Apache had good reasons to distrust white settlers, and Thomas represented everything they feared about the changing world. But despite the danger, neither could stay away. Thomas found himself thinking about Ayana constantly, and she seemed equally drawn to him. They shared stories about their different lives and began to understand each other in ways that went beyond language. Thomas told Ayana about his life back east, about his sick mother and his dreams of making enough money to help her. Ayana spoke about her tribe, her family, and the old ways that seemed to be disappearing as more white settlers moved west. As their friendship grew deeper, both Thomas and Ayana knew they were walking a dangerous path. Love between a white man and an Apache woman was not just forbidden, it was deadly. But their hearts had already decided. Even if their minds knew the risks, the canyon where they met became their secret world, a place where the differences between their peoples didn't matter. There, they were simply two young people falling in love despite all the reasons why they shouldn't. Neither realized that their secret meetings had not gone completely unnoticed, and that soon their hidden romance would be discovered in the most dangerous way possible. Weeks passed as Thomas and Ayana continued their secret meetings in the hidden canyon. Their love grew stronger with each encounter, but so did the danger surrounding them. Thomas had finished most of his surveying work, yet he found reasons to stay in the area longer than necessary. Ayana's younger brother, Nalnish, had begun to notice her strange behavior. She would disappear for hours at a time, claiming to be gathering herbs or fetching water from distant springs. But Nalnish was clever and observant. He had seen the happiness in his sister's eyes, a glow that hadn't been there before. One morning, Nalnish decided to follow Ayana when she left camp with her water basket. He stayed far behind, using skills their father had taught him for hunting. He watched as Ayana walked past the usual water source and continued toward the canyon, where the white surveyor had been seen. Hidden among the rocks, Nalnish witnessed something that filled him with horror and anger. His beloved sister was meeting with the white man, speaking with him in friendly tones, even laughing together. Worse still, he saw the way they looked at each other. It was clear that his sister had feelings for this outsider. Nalnish's first instinct was to run back to camp and tell their father, Chief Cocheta, immediately. But something held him back. He loved his sister deeply and knew that revealing her secret would bring terrible punishment upon her. In Apache culture, any woman who consorted with the enemy faced severe consequences, sometimes even death. Instead, Nalnish decided to confront Ayana privately first. He waited until she returned to camp that evening, then followed her to the edge of the village where she often sat alone under the stars. "Sister," he said quietly, startling her from her thoughts. Ayana looked up, and even in the moonlight, Nalnish could see the guilt in her eyes. She knew immediately that he had discovered her secret. "How long have you known?" she asked softly. "I followed you today," Nalnish replied, sitting beside her on a fallen log. "How could you do this, Ayana? How could you betray our people?" Tears began to flow down Ayana's face. "You don't understand, brother. He's not like the other white men. Thomas is kind and gentle. He doesn't want to harm our people. He works for the railroad," Nalnish said angrily, though he kept his voice low to avoid being overheard. "The Iron Horse will bring more white settlers, more soldiers, more death for our tribe." "And you help him by meeting with him?" Ayana shook her head desperately. "I've told him not to bring the railroad through our sacred places. He listens to me, Nalnish. He cares about our way of life." "A white man cannot care about Apache ways," Nalnish insisted. "They only take what they want and destroy what they cannot use. Father always taught us this." "But Thomas is different," Ayana pleaded. "If you could meet him, talk with him, you would understand." Nalnish stood up abruptly. "I will never speak with that man, and neither should you. Promise me you will stop meeting him, or I will have no choice but to tell Father." The threat hung in the air between them. Ayana knew her brother was torn between his love for her and his duty to their tribe. She also knew that if their father learned of her meetings with Thomas, the consequences would be severe. "Please, give me time," Ayana whispered. "Let me say goodbye to him properly. Then I will end it." Nalnish studied his sister's face in the moonlight. He could see the pain in her eyes and it broke his heart, but he also knew the danger she was in. 3 days, he said finally. "I will give you 3 days to end this madness." After that, I must tell father. I cannot watch you destroy yourself for a white man. Meanwhile, Thomas was having his own struggles. The railroad company had sent a messenger demanding to know why his survey was taking so long. They wanted his maps completed immediately so construction could begin. Thomas knew he couldn't delay much longer without losing his job, but the thought of leaving Ayanna behind was unbearable. He had fallen deeply in love with her, and he could see that she felt the same way. In their secret meetings, they had even begun to talk about a future together. Impossible as it seemed, Thomas had wild dreams of taking Ayanna back east with him, where they could start a new life away from the conflicts between their peoples. But he knew how naive such dreams were. An Apache woman would never be accepted in white society, and he would never be welcomed by her tribe. During their next meeting in the canyon, Ayanna told Thomas about her conversation with Nalnish. Thomas could see the fear and sadness in her eyes as she explained that they only had a few more days before her secret would be revealed. "Run away with me," Thomas said suddenly, taking her hands in his. "We could go to California or even Mexico. Somewhere far from both our peoples where we could be together." Ayanna's heart ached at the desperation in his voice. "I cannot leave my family, my tribe," she said softly. "They are everything to me. Without them I would be nothing." "But what about us?" Thomas asked. "What we have is real, Ayanna. It's worth fighting for." "In 3 days I must stop seeing you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "My brother will tell my father, and then—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "There has to be another way. I won't let them keep us apart." "There is no other way," Ayanna sobbed. "Our love is impossible. I should never have let it begin." As they held each other in the canyon, neither Thomas nor Ayanna noticed the figure watching them from above. Nalnish had followed his sister again, wanting to see for himself what hold this white man had over her. What Nalnish saw made his blood run cold. His sister was in the arms of the enemy, and it was clear that their relationship had gone far beyond simple conversation. The way they touched, the way they looked at each other, told Nalnish everything he needed to know. His sister had not just been talking with a white man. She had fallen completely in love with him and he with her. This was far worse than Nalnish had imagined. This wasn't just friendship or curiosity about the outside world. This was a betrayal of everything their people stood for. Nalnish crept away silently, his mind made up. He could not wait 3 more days. The situation was too dangerous, too serious to keep secret any longer. That very night he would have to tell their father what he had discovered. As Thomas and Ayanna said their goodbyes in the canyon, both sensed that something had changed. There was a heaviness in the air, a feeling that their time together was running out faster than they had hoped. "I will always love you," Thomas whispered as they parted. "And I will always love you," Ayanna replied, touching his face gently. "No matter what happens." Neither knew that their next meeting would be their last as free people, and that the events Nalnish was about to set in motion would change all their lives forever. That night, Nalnish sat outside his father's teepee, gathering courage for what he had to do. Chief Cocheta was a wise but stern leader who had guided their tribe through many difficult times. He had fought against white soldiers and had seen too many promises broken by the pale-faced men who claimed to want peace. When Nalnish finally entered the teepee, he found his father sitting by a small fire, smoking his ceremonial pipe and deep in thought. Chief Cocheta looked up at his son and immediately sensed that something was troubling him. "Speak, my son," the chief said in their native language. "Your heart is heavy with secrets." Nalnish knelt beside his father, struggling to find the right words. "Father, I must tell you something about Ayanna, something that will bring shame to our family and anger to our tribe." Chief Cocheta set down his pipe, his weathered face growing serious. "What has your sister done?" "She has been meeting secretly with the white surveyor," Nalnish said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For many weeks now. And father, they have feelings for each other." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Chief Cocheta's face remained calm, but Nalnish could see the storm building in his father's dark eyes. "You are certain of this?" the chief asked finally. "I have seen them together with my own eyes, twice now. They speak as lovers speak, touch as lovers touch. She has betrayed everything we believe in." Chief Cocheta stood up slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. "Where is Ayanna now?" "Sleeping in her teepee, father. She doesn't know that I have told you. The chief walked to the entrance of his teepee and looked out at the quiet village. His people trusted him to protect them, to preserve their ways, and to punish those who threatened their survival. A daughter who consorted with the enemy was a threat to everyone. "Wake the council," Chief Cochetta commanded. "All the warriors must know of this betrayal before the sun rises." Within an hour, the most respected men of the tribe had gathered in the chief's teepee. They sat in a circle around the fire as Nalnish repeated his story. The faces of the warriors grew dark with anger as they learned of Ayana's secret meetings with Thomas. Old Geronimo, the war chief, was the first to speak after Nalnish finished. "This white man must die," he said simply, "and the woman must be punished according to our laws." "But she is my daughter," Chief Cochetta said, though his voice showed no weakness. "The blood of our ancestors flows in her veins." "The blood of our ancestors calls for justice," replied another warrior named Taza. "She has chosen the enemy over her own people. She has put all of us in danger." The debate continued through the night. Some warriors called for Ayana's immediate execution, while others suggested exile or other punishments, but all agreed that Thomas Crawford must be captured and killed. As dawn approached, Chief Cochetta made his decision. "We will capture the white man when he comes to meet my daughter. He will face the judgment of our tribe. As for Ayana, she will be given a chance to prove her loyalty to our people." "How, father?" asked Nalnish. "She will watch as we punish the white man," the chief replied coldly. "If she truly repents of her betrayal, she will accept his death as justice. If she tries to protect him, then we will know where her heart truly lies." The next morning, Ayana woke to find several warriors standing outside her teepee. Her heart sank as she realized her secret had been discovered. They escorted her to her father's teepee, where Chief Cochetta waited with a face like stone. "Daughter," he said without emotion, "you have brought shame upon our family and danger upon our tribe." Ayana lowered her eyes, unable to meet her father's gaze. "I am sorry, father." "Sorry is not enough," the chief replied. "Your brother has told us everything. You have been meeting with our enemy, sharing our secrets, betraying everything we hold sacred." "He is not our enemy," Ayana said suddenly, looking up with tears in her eyes. "Thomas is a good man. He would never harm our people." Chief Cochetta's face hardened at her words. "Even now you defend him. Even facing the anger of your own people, you choose the white man over your family." "I choose love over hate," Ayana said bravely, though her voice trembled. "I choose hope over fear." "You choose death," said Geronimo harshly. "For yourself and for him." Chief Cochetta raised his hand for silence. "The white man will come to meet you today as he always does. Our warriors will be waiting for him. You will witness his capture and then you will choose." "Choose what?" Ayana asked, though she feared the answer. "Choose whether you are Apache or white man's woman," her father replied. "If you are Apache, you will accept his punishment and return to your people. If you are his woman, then you will share his fate." Ayana felt the world spinning around her. She understood now that there was no escape, no hope for her and Thomas to be together. Her secret meetings with him had doomed them both. Later that morning, warriors took positions all around the canyon where Ayana usually met Thomas. They hid behind rocks and trees, their weapons ready. Ayana was placed where Thomas would be able to see her, but she was surrounded by guards. Chief Cochetta and the other leaders watched from a high ridge overlooking the canyon. Everything was prepared. All they had to do now was wait for the white surveyor to arrive for what he thought would be another secret meeting with his love. "He will come," Nalnish said to his father. "I have watched them. He always comes. And when he does, he will learn the price of taking an Apache woman." Chief Cochetta replied grimly. Down in the canyon, Ayana sat on a rock where she and Thomas had shared so many happy moments. Her heart was breaking as she thought about what was about to happen. She had tried to think of some way to warn Thomas, but the warriors were watching her every move. She could only pray to the spirits that somehow, some miracle would save the man she loved. But deep in her heart she knew that when Thomas appeared in the canyon, he would be walking into a trap that would destroy them both. The sun climbed higher in the sky as they waited. Every minute felt like an hour to Ayana. She kept hoping that maybe Thomas wouldn't come, that somehow he would sense the danger and stay away. But she knew he would come just as he always did, because he loved her and trusted her, and when he appeared at the edge of the canyon, Riding his horse and looking for her with eyes full of love, Ayana's heart shattered completely. She wanted to scream a warning, but before she could make a sound, the warriors burst from their hiding places and surrounded him. Thomas had been riding toward the canyon with a heavy heart, knowing this might be one of his last meetings with Ayana. The railroad company had sent another urgent message demanding his completed maps, and he couldn't delay much longer without facing serious consequences. As he guided his horse down the familiar trail, Thomas was thinking about their conversation from the previous day. Ayana had seemed more frightened than usual, and her tears had shown him how desperate their situation had become. He had spent the entire night wondering if there was any way they could build a life together. When Thomas reached the spot where he usually left his horse, everything seemed normal. The canyon was quiet except for the sound of wind through the rocks and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. He could see Ayana sitting on their favorite rock, but something felt different about her posture. She seemed tense, afraid. Thomas started walking toward her, a smile beginning to form on his face despite his worries. Even in their darkest moments, seeing Ayana always brought him joy. But as he got closer, he noticed that she wasn't looking at him with her usual warmth. Instead, her eyes were wide with terror. Before Thomas could understand what was happening, Apache warriors seemed to rise from the very rocks around him. They appeared from behind boulders, from crevices in the canyon walls, from clumps of desert brush. Within seconds, he was completely surrounded by more than a dozen armed men. Thomas's horse reared up in fright, and Thomas fell to the ground hard. Before he could get to his feet, strong hands grabbed his arms and pulled him upright. He found himself staring into the painted faces of Apache warriors, their eyes filled with hatred and anger. "Ayana," Thomas called out, not understanding what was happening. "What's going on?" But Ayana couldn't answer. She was surrounded by her own guards, and tears were streaming down her face as she watched the man she loved being captured by her own people. The warriors bound Thomas's hands behind his back with strong rawhide rope, then tied another rope around his neck like a leash. They took his surveying equipment and threw it on the ground, crushing his expensive instruments under their feet. Chief Cocheta appeared at the top of the canyon wall, looking down at the captured white man with cold satisfaction. He raised his hand and the warriors began dragging Thomas up the steep path toward the main Apache camp. "Please," Thomas shouted, struggling against his bonds. "I haven't done anything wrong. I was just mapping the land." One of the warriors struck him across the face, splitting his lip. "Silence, white devil," the man said in broken English. "You will speak when Chief Cocheta permits it." As they hauled Thomas up the rocky trail, he could see Ayana being escorted by her own guards. She was crying freely now, and Thomas finally began to understand that their secret had been discovered. His heart filled with dread as he realized what this meant for both of them. The journey to the Apache camp took nearly an hour. Thomas stumbled repeatedly on the rough ground, and each time he fell, the warriors jerked him back to his feet by the rope around his neck. By the time they reached the village, he was bruised and bleeding from numerous cuts and scrapes. The entire tribe had gathered to see the captured white man. Men, women, and children lined the path as the warriors dragged Thomas toward the center of the camp. Some of the people shouted angry words in Apache, while others just stared at him with curiosity and contempt. Thomas had never felt so alone and frightened in his entire life. These people saw him as their enemy, a threat to everything they held dear. He could see the hatred in their faces, and he knew that his chances of survival were very small. In the center of the camp, a large pole had been erected specifically for this occasion. The warriors forced Thomas to sit at the base of the pole, then tied him securely with multiple ropes around his chest, arms, and legs. The bonds were so tight that he could barely move. Chief Cocheta emerged from his teepee wearing his full ceremonial regalia. His face was painted with red and black designs that made him look terrifying in the afternoon sunlight. He carried a war lance and wore a magnificent headdress of eagle feathers that marked his status as the tribe's leader. The chief walked slowly around Thomas, studying him like a hunter examining his prey. The entire tribe fell silent as they waited to hear what their leader would say. "White man," Chief Cocheta finally spoke in English, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "You have violated our lands and corrupted one of our women. What do you say to these charges?" Thomas tried to speak, but his throat was so dry that only a croak came out. One of the warriors threw a gourd of water at his face, and Thomas gratefully licked the drops from his lips before trying again. "I never meant any harm," Thomas said, his voice stronger now. "I was only doing my job mapping the territory for the railroad company." "The railroad," Chief Cochetta spat. "The iron horse that will bring more white settlers to steal our lands and kill our buffalo." "I'm just a surveyor," Thomas protested. "I don't make the decisions about where the railroad goes. I just measure and make maps. And while you measured our land," the chief continued, "you also tried to steal our women. My daughter has been meeting with you in secret, betraying her own people for your lies and false promises." Thomas looked around desperately until he spotted Ayanna standing with a group of women on the far side of the circle. Her face was streaked with tears and she looked as terrified as he felt. "I love her," Thomas said loudly, his words carrying across the silent camp. "And she loves me. We never meant to betray anyone." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd at his bold words. Several warriors stepped forward as if to strike him, but Chief Cochetta raised his hand for them to stop. "Love," the chief said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You speak of love while you work to destroy our way of life. You speak of love while you serve those who would drive us from our ancient homes. The railroad doesn't have to destroy your way of life," Thomas said desperately. "There are ways to build it that would respect your lands and your people." "There is only one way to deal with white men who threaten our survival," Chief Cochetta replied. "The same way we have always dealt with our enemies." The chief raised his lance high above his head, and the crowd began to chant in Apache. Thomas could see the bloodlust in their eyes, and he knew that his execution was about to begin. But then, cutting through the chanting like a knife through leather, came a woman's voice shouting in English, "Stop! Please stop!" Every head in the camp turned toward the sound, and Thomas felt his heart break as he saw Ayanna pushing through the crowd toward him, ignoring the guards who tried to hold her back. Ayanna broke free from her guards and ran toward Thomas, her long black hair flowing behind her like a dark river. The entire tribe watched in shock as she threw herself to her knees beside the bound man, placing her body between him and her father's raised lance. "Father, please," she cried out in Apache, then switched to English so Thomas could understand. "Don't kill him. He has done nothing wrong." Chief Cochetta's face darkened with rage at his daughter's public defiance. "Stand aside, Ayanna. You have brought enough shame upon our family." "I will not let you murder an innocent man," Ayanna said, her voice growing stronger despite her tears. "If you want to kill him, you will have to kill me first." The crowd gasped at her bold words. Never before had anyone, especially a woman, dared to challenge Chief Cochetta so directly in front of the entire tribe. The warriors looked uncertain, unsure whether to drag Ayanna away or wait for their chief's command. Thomas struggled against his bonds, desperate to protect Ayanna even though he was helpless. "Don't do this," he pleaded with her. "Don't sacrifice yourself for me. Your people need you." "My people need to learn that love is stronger than hate," Ayanna replied, never taking her eyes off her father. "This man has shown me kindness when he could have treated me as an enemy. He has listened to our ways with respect instead of trying to destroy them." Chief Cochetta lowered his lance slowly, studying his daughter's face. "You would choose this white man over your own tribe? Over the family that raised you and loved you?" "I choose both," Ayanna said firmly. "I choose love for my people and love for this man. Why must I choose only one?" Old Geronimo stepped forward, his weathered face twisted with anger. "Because white men and Apache cannot live in peace," he shouted. "They take our land, kill our children, break every promise they make. This one is no different." "But he is different," Ayanna insisted, turning to face the war chief. "Thomas has spent weeks learning our language, our customs. He has asked me about our sacred places so the railroad could avoid them. He has shown more respect for our ways than many of our own white neighbors." Several of the tribal elders began murmuring among themselves. They had heard stories of other white men who had learned Indian ways and lived peacefully among different tribes. But such men were rare, and trusting any white person was dangerous. Thomas cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention back to him. "If I may speak," he said as respectfully as possible, "I want you all to know that Ayanna never betrayed any of your secrets to me. She never told me anything that could harm your people. Instead, she taught me to see the beauty in your culture and the wisdom in your traditions." "Pretty words," said another warrior named Victorio. "But you still work for the railroad. You still help the white men steal Indian land. I work for the railroad because I need money to help my sick mother, Thomas admitted. But I can promise you this. I have marked your sacred burial grounds on my maps as places where the tracks cannot be built. I have also marked the areas where your people hunt and gather food as protected land. Chief Cocheta raised an eyebrow at this news. You have done this without your bosses knowing? Yes, Thomas said simply. Because Ayana taught me that some things are more important than money or jobs. Some things are sacred and must be protected. The chief looked at his daughter, who was still kneeling protectively beside Thomas. He could see the determination in her eyes, the same fierce spirit that had always made her special among their people. Ayana, he said softly, do you truly believe this man speaks the truth? I know he speaks the truth, Father, she replied without hesitation. I have seen his maps. I have watched him work. He has tried to protect our land even when it would have been easier for him to ignore our needs. A young warrior named Nietzsche stepped forward from the crowd. Even if this is true, he said, the man is still white. If we let him live, other white men will think we are weak. They will send more surveyors, more soldiers, more settlers. But if we kill every white man who shows us kindness, Ayana argued, we will have only enemies left. Thomas could be a bridge between our peoples. He could help other white men understand our ways. Chief Cocheta walked in a slow circle around Thomas and Ayana, considering his daughter's words. The entire tribe waited in tense silence for their leader's decision. Finally, the chief stopped directly in front of Thomas and looked down into his eyes. White man, he said, my daughter believes you are different from the others. She believes you can be trusted. But I have been betrayed by white men too many times to trust easily. I understand your caution, Thomas replied. If I were in your place, I would feel the same way. So I will give you a choice, Chief Cocheta continued. You can return to your people and continue working for the railroad. If you do this, you must never see my daughter again, and you must never tell anyone about our village or our secrets. In return, we will let you live. Thomas's heart sank as he realized what the chief was offering, freedom, but only if he abandoned the woman he loved forever. Or, the chief continued, you can stay here and prove your loyalty to our people. You can become one of us, live as we live, fight as we fight. If you choose this path, you may marry my daughter according to our customs. But you must give up your old life completely. You will never see your white family again. And you must be willing to fight against your own people if they threaten us. Thomas felt the weight of the impossible choice crushing down on him. Stay with Ayana and abandon everything he had ever known, or return to his old life and lose the woman he loved forever. There is a third choice, Chief Cocheta added, his voice growing cold again. If you cannot make this decision, if you try to have both worlds, then you are no use to anyone. In that case, you will die here today, and my daughter will learn that love built on lies always ends in death. The silence stretched on as Thomas struggled with the most difficult decision of his life. He thought about his sick mother back in Pennsylvania, depending on the money he sent home. He thought about his job, his future plans, everything he had worked for. But then he looked at Ayana, still kneeling beside him with tears streaming down her face, and he knew there was really no choice at all. I choose to stay, Thomas said clearly, his voice carrying across the entire camp. I choose your daughter, your people, and your way of life. I will prove my loyalty to the Apache Nation, no matter what it costs me. A murmur went through the crowd, some voices approving, others skeptical. Ayana's face lit up with joy and relief, but she remained kneeling beside Thomas, not daring to celebrate until her father gave his final word. Chief Cocheta studied Thomas for a long moment, searching his eyes for any sign of deception or doubt. Finally, he nodded slowly. Very well, the chief said, but your words are easy to speak. Your actions must prove their truth. You will undergo the trials that all Apache warriors must face. If you survive and prove your courage, you may marry my daughter. If you fail or show cowardice, you will die as an enemy. I accept your terms, Thomas said without hesitation. Chief Cocheta raised his lance again, but this time it was a signal for the warriors to untie Thomas rather than to kill him. As the ropes fell away, Thomas rubbed his sore wrists and ankles, hardly believing that he was still alive. Ayana, the chief said to his daughter, you have chosen to stand with this man. His fate is now your fate. If he fails the trials, you will be exiled from our tribe forever. Ayana stood up and faced her father bravely. I understand, Father. I accept the consequences of my choice. Then let the trials begin, Chief Cochetta declared. At sunrise tomorrow, the white man will prove whether he has the heart of an Apache warrior or the weakness of his race. That night, Thomas sat alone in a small teepee at the edge of the Apache camp. His hands were no longer bound, but he was still essentially a prisoner. 2 young warriors stood guard outside, making sure he didn't try to escape before the trials began. Thomas couldn't sleep as he thought about what lay ahead. He had heard stories about Apache warrior trials from other white men, and none of those stories had happy endings. The tests were designed to break men, to separate the strong from the weak in the harshest ways possible. But Thomas wasn't thinking about his own safety. He was thinking about Ayanna and what would happen to her if he failed. Chief Cochetta had made it clear that she would be exiled from her tribe forever if Thomas couldn't prove himself worthy. The thought of her being cast out into the wilderness because of his failure was more terrifying than any physical trial he might face. Around midnight, Thomas heard a soft rustling at the back of the teepee. A small section of the hide wall lifted slightly, and Ayanna slipped inside, moving as quietly as a shadow. "You shouldn't be here," Thomas whispered urgently. "If they catch you..." "Shh." Ayanna pressed her finger to his lips. "The guards are my cousins. They will not betray me." She sat beside him in the darkness, and Thomas could see the worry in her eyes even in the dim moonlight filtering through the teepee walls. "Tell me about these trials," Thomas said quietly. "What should I expect?" Ayanna was silent for a long moment before answering. "There are 3 trials, each more difficult than the last. The first tests your physical strength and endurance. You must survive a day and night alone in the desert with no food or water, while being hunted by our best trackers." Thomas nodded grimly. He had spent enough time in the desert to know how brutal it could be, especially without supplies. "The second trial tests your courage and skill as a warrior," Ayanna continued. "You must face 3 of our greatest fighters in combat, one after another, using traditional Apache weapons." "And the third?" Thomas asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "The third trial tests your spirit and your commitment to our people," Ayanna said softly. "You must undergo the vision quest, where you will be left alone on a sacred mountain for 4 days and nights without food or water. If the spirits accept you, you will receive visions that guide you to your new Apache name and your place in our tribe." Thomas felt his heart sinking as he listened to the challenges ahead. Each trial seemed designed to kill him, and he had to survive all 3 to earn the right to marry Ayanna. "Many Apache men die during these trials," Ayanna admitted. "And you are not Apache. You were not raised from childhood to endure such hardships. But some men do survive," Thomas said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Yes," Ayanna nodded. "Those who have the strongest will to live and the deepest reason to succeed." Thomas took her hands in his. "My reason is sitting right here beside me. I won't fail you, Ayanna." "I can't. I know you will try," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "But Thomas, if something happens to you, if you don't survive..." "I will survive," Thomas interrupted firmly. "I have to. We've come too far and sacrificed too much to give up now." Ayanna leaned against him, drawing strength from his determination. "My father respects you more than he shows," she said quietly. "The fact that he offered you these trials instead of immediate death means he sees something worthy in you." "What do you see in me?" Thomas asked. "I see the man I want to spend my life with," Ayanna replied simply. "I see someone brave enough to love me even when it meant risking everything. I see the father of the children I hope to have someday." They held each other in the darkness, both trying not to think about the very real possibility that this might be their last night together. Outside, they could hear the sounds of the sleeping camp, the soft snoring of warriors, the occasional whinny of horses and the crackling of dying campfires. "There's something else," Ayanna whispered after a while. "Something that might help you during the trials." She reached into a small pouch she carried and pulled out a thin leather cord with a small turquoise stone attached to it. "This belonged to my grandmother," she explained, fastening it around Thomas's neck. "She was a powerful medicine woman, and this stone is said to protect the wearer from harm." Thomas touched the smooth stone gently. "I can't take this. It's too precious to your family." "My grandmother appeared to me in a dream last night," Ayanna said seriously. "She told me to give this to you. She said the stone has been waiting for the right warrior to wear it." "A white warrior?" Thomas asked doubtfully. "A warrior who fights for love instead of hate," Ayanna corrected. The color of his skin doesn't matter to the spirits. As dawn approached, Ayanna prepared to leave. She kissed Thomas gently, pouring all her love and hope into that single moment. "Remember," she whispered, "you are not just fighting for yourself. You are fighting for our future, for our children, for the bridge between our peoples that you spoke of." "I'll remember," Thomas promised. "And when I return, we'll be married according to your customs, and we'll build the life we've dreamed of." Ayanna slipped out of the teepee as quietly as she had entered, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts and fears. But he felt stronger now, more determined. The turquoise stone seemed to pulse with warmth against his chest, as if it truly did carry some protective power. When the sun rose over the desert, Thomas heard the sound of drums beginning to beat in the center of the camp. The trials were about to begin, and there was no turning back. Chief Cochetta appeared at the entrance to the teepee, dressed in full ceremonial regalia. Behind him stood several warriors, all painted for the ritual that was about to unfold. "It is time, white man," the chief said solemnly. "Are you ready to prove yourself worthy of my daughter and our people?" Thomas stood up, straightened his shoulders, and walked out of the teepee to face whatever the Apache spirits had in store for him. As he stepped into the morning sunlight, he could see the entire tribe gathered in a great circle, waiting to witness his first trial. And there, standing with the other women but apart from them, was Ayanna. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Thomas saw such love and faith in her gaze that he felt like he could survive anything. The first trial began at sunrise. Thomas was given only a knife and a small water skin that held barely enough liquid for a few sips. He was taken to the edge of the desert and told that he had until the next sunrise to reach a sacred rock formation 20 miles away, while being hunted by 3 of the tribe's best trackers. "If they catch you before you reach the rocks," Chief Cochetta explained, "you will be brought back and executed. If you reach the rocks but arrive after sunrise, you will also be executed. Only by reaching the destination before dawn while avoiding capture will you pass the first trial." Thomas nodded, understanding that this was as much a test of his mental strength as his physical abilities. The Apache trackers were legendary for their skills, and the desert was unforgiving to those who didn't know its secrets. As soon as the chief gave the signal, Thomas began running toward the distant rock formation. He could see it on the horizon like a red finger pointing at the sky, but 20 miles across desert terrain would test every ounce of his endurance. The sun climbed higher as Thomas jogged steadily across the sandy landscape, trying to conserve his energy for the long journey ahead. He had learned some desert survival techniques from his surveying work, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of extreme test. By midday, the heat was becoming unbearable. Thomas's shirt was soaked with sweat, and he was tempted to drink from his water skin, but he knew he had to save every drop for when he truly needed it. The Apache trackers were somewhere behind him, probably moving at a more comfortable pace because they knew the desert better. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas began to feel the effects of dehydration. His head was pounding and his vision was starting to blur slightly. But every time he felt like giving up, he thought about Ayanna and the promise he had made to her. When the sun began to set, Thomas allowed himself a small sip of water and pressed on through the growing darkness. This was when the real danger would begin, because the Apache trackers would have the advantage of knowing the terrain in the dark. Around midnight, Thomas heard the sound of footsteps behind him. His heart raced as he realized that the hunters were closing in. He began to run faster despite his exhaustion, using every shadow and rock formation to hide his movements. The chase continued through the night, with Thomas sometimes hearing his pursuers getting closer, sometimes thinking he had lost them completely. His legs felt like they were on fire, and his lungs burned with each breath, but he kept moving toward the sacred rocks. As dawn approached, Thomas could see the rock formation clearly ahead of him, but he could also hear the trackers getting closer. It would be a race to see whether he could reach safety before they caught him. With the sun just beginning to appear on the horizon, Thomas reached the base of the sacred rocks and touched the ancient stone with his hand. He had made it with just minutes to spare, and the 3 Apache trackers emerged from the desert behind him, nodding with respect at his achievement. The second trial took place that same day. Despite Thomas's exhaustion from the desert ordeal, he was given a short rest, some food and water, and then led to a circular area where the combat trials would take place. Chief Cocheta presented Thomas with traditional Apache weapons, a war club, a knife, and a spear. "You must defeat 3 of our warriors in single combat," the chief explained. "You do not have to kill them, but you must prove your skill and courage by fighting until one of you can no longer continue." The first warrior was a young man about Thomas's age, quick and agile but not as experienced as the older fighters. Thomas managed to defeat him after a fierce struggle, using his longer reach and the techniques Ayanna had taught him during their secret meetings. The second warrior was much more challenging. He was older, craftier, and had been fighting since childhood. Thomas took several painful hits before finally managing to trip his opponent and pin him to the ground with his spear. By the time the third warrior entered the circle, Thomas was bleeding from multiple cuts and could barely stand. This final opponent was Geronimo himself, the war chief, and Thomas knew this would be the hardest fight of his life. Geronimo was a master of all Apache weapons and fighting styles. He moved with the grace of a dancer and struck with the power of a mountain cat. For several minutes, Thomas could only defend himself, trying to avoid the war chief's devastating attacks. But then Thomas remembered Ayanna's words about fighting for love instead of hate. Instead of trying to match Geronimo's aggression, Thomas began fighting defensively, looking for opportunities to end the combat without seriously injuring the respected war chief. When Geronimo made a particularly aggressive attack, Thomas managed to step aside and use the older man's momentum against him, sending him sprawling to the ground. Instead of pressing his advantage, Thomas stepped back and offered his hand to help Geronimo up. The war chief looked surprised by this gesture of respect, then smiled grimly and accepted Thomas's hand. "You fight with honor," Geronimo said in English. "That is more important than fighting with fury." The final trial, the Vision Quest, was the most difficult of all. Thomas was taken to a high mountain peak and left alone with no food or water for 4 days and nights. He was told to wait for visions that would reveal his Apache name and his place in the tribe. For the first 2 days, Thomas felt only hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. He began to wonder if the spirits would speak to him at all since he was not born Apache. But on the 3rd night, as he sat shivering under the desert stars, something extraordinary happened. Thomas began to have vivid dreams that felt more real than waking life. He saw himself and Ayanna living peacefully in the Apache village, raising children who belonged to both worlds. He saw himself serving as a bridge between the Apache people and the white settlers, helping them find ways to share the land peacefully. In his vision, an ancient Apache woman appeared to him, Ayanna's grandmother, he somehow knew. She spoke to him in perfect English even though she had died before white men came to this land. "Your name will be Tsudzil," she told him, which means mountain that stands alone. "Like a mountain, you will be strong and enduring. Like one that stands alone, you will be unique among both your peoples." When Thomas was brought down from the mountain after 4 days, he was weak and barely conscious, but his eyes shone with a new understanding of his place in the world. Chief Cocheta looked into those eyes and saw that the spirits had indeed accepted this white man as one of their own. "You have passed all 3 trials," the chief announced to the gathered tribe. "You are now Tsudzil of the Apache people. You have earned the right to marry my daughter." The wedding ceremony took place that very evening, combining both Apache traditions and some customs that honored Thomas's own heritage. As Ayanna placed a necklace of turquoise and silver around his neck, and he placed a ring made by the tribe's silversmith on her finger, both knew that their love had not only survived the greatest trial, but had created something new and beautiful. Years later, Thomas, now known as Tsudzil, did indeed serve as a bridge between the Apache people and the white settlers. He used his knowledge of both worlds to negotiate peaceful agreements that allowed both peoples to share the land. The railroad was built, but it followed routes that respected Apache sacred sites and hunting grounds. Thomas and Ayanna raised 3 children who were proud of both their Apache and white heritage. Their eldest son became a great leader who continued his father's work of building peace between the peoples. Their daughter became a teacher who helped Apache children learn English while keeping their own language and traditions alive. And sometimes, when Thomas told the story of how he and Ayanna met, he would touch the turquoise stone that still hung around his neck and marvel at how love had transformed them from enemies into family, from strangers into a bridge between 2 worlds that had once seemed impossible to connect.